I am back with another book review. Book review. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to you all. My name is Annabelle, and like I always say, God bless you all for watching my videos, and God bless you for tuning in to this one. So today I am filming a book review, and I am really excited about the book that I am about to review because this book is interesting, just interesting, you know. And yeah, let's get into the review. Okay, so today's book review is about It Takes a Woman. So this book is called It Takes a Woman by Mrs. Nana Konadu Rollins, and a little history about the author of the book, right? So Mrs. Nana Konadu Rollins, so she is the wife of the late former president of Ghana, Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings. I feel like he's kind of quite well known, but maybe he may be just well known among Africans. So for those of you that may not know him, Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings, half Ghanaian, half Scottish man. He was born and raised in Ghana, I believe. From the book, that's what the book says, and you know, I believe. And he was in the Ghana Armed Forces. He was a lieutenant, and he was a pilot. So he flew. Yeah, he was in the army, and yeah, he was a pilot in the army. And he later became the president of Ghana, and this is his wife. And Mrs. Nana Konadu Rollins is also actually she has a party, so she's like a flag bearer for one of the political parties in Ghana. I'm not really sure how well known the party is in Ghana, but I know that she is the flag bearer of a political party in Ghana. But yeah, so the book is interesting. And first of all, the title of the book, It Takes a Woman. For me, it was actually the title that made me want to read the book, first of all, and then the fact that it was written by her. And I'm going to explain why that really drawn me to the book. But first, let's talk about the title. So It Takes a Woman. The title really is, you know, when you first see the title, you may think, oh, well, let me talk for myself actually. When I first saw the book and I saw the title, I was like, this will be interesting. The first thought that came into my head was, It Takes a Woman. Okay, this book may probably be about African feminism, or maybe about like women empowerment in Africa or something like that. That's what I thought it was going to be about. But to my surprise, it was about so much more than that. You know, It Takes a Woman in a nutshell for me is about how, as a Ghanaian woman, how her life has been shaped by the various women around her, how her life has been shaped by her community, how her life has been shaped by her country, how her life has been shaped by her marriage, by basically everything around her, you know, has shaped her life. And that's why the book is called It Takes a Woman. And in the book talks about the prominent women in her life growing up and how they really shaped her life. And the beautiful thing about this book is that it is a memoir and it's a true story. You know, it's a story about her life and all the various things that has happened in her life. And she tells the story about her life so beautifully. You know, most of the time when you read memoirs or autobiographies, it's often just about the person, so like kind of like the person's personal life. Most of the time that's what memoirs and autobiographies are about. But one thing that is different about this memoir is that Mrs. Konadu Rollins does not only talk about her personal life. She talks about Ghana. You know, she talks about growing up in Ghana. She talks about being a woman in Ghana in the 1960s. You know, she talks about being a woman in Ghana in the various decades that she grew up in. And to me, I love that because I did not exist during those decades, and I loved being able to kind of live in those decades through the book. So for example, she talks about growing up as a child in Ghana during Nkrumah's regime. So those of you that are not Ghanaians, or those of you that do not know much about African politics, Kwame Nkrumah was a president in Ghana. So he's literally the one that got independence for Ghana. Mrs. Nanakune Dwajman-Rollins grew up in that Nkrumah regime, and it's just so amazing kind of like reading how life was back then. And you know, like growing up in Ghana, you would hear things, you know, how those times were, and obviously people would say how things were back then from kind of like maybe their own personal experience, and that's how history is. People would often tell history from how they experienced it, you know. And it's interesting how she kind of like tells it. She doesn't just tell it from how she experienced it, but she tells you how it was like living in the 1960s, being a mom. So she tells you how her mom felt at that time, how her dad felt at that time, how she felt, how her grandparents felt. So you're getting different narratives in one book, even though the book is a memoir. And for me, she did that really well. She told her story really well, and it really resonated with me, because being an African woman, like your individuality is built in that collectivity. So as an African woman, I'm not just Annabelle. Like I grew up in a community, I grew up in a home surrounded by other women. I was raised by my grandma, and so my life is so much shaped by the upbringing that I got from my grandma, my aunties, my uncles, other people that I grew up around, you know, that extended family type of thing. And you get that from the book. You know, she talks about growing up with her great aunt. You know, her great aunt was a big part of her life. And as I was reading the book, I was just thinking, wow, like, you know, Ghana, in terms of like the family system, hasn't really changed that much over the years. It's kind of been the same. I guess maybe now the only difference now compared to during like the 1960s and 70s in Ghana is that modernity has changed a lot. Especially modernity has changed even the way that we live, in the sense that now people, you know, would live more in the nuclear family settings than living with like their extended family. But then back then, it was so normal to live with your grandparents, so normal to live with your aunties, your great aunties in the same house. And that's how I grew up. I lived with my grandparents and my uncles and my aunties in the same house, and it was the same back then. So like as I was reading the book, I was just like, wow, Ghana back then and Ghana now, yes, there are differences, but there are still things that are the same. You know, it's still Ghana and the same things that I've seen Ghana to be as I've been growing up was the same back then. Yeah. So another thing that I really enjoyed about this book is how she tells Ghana during colonialism. And you know, obviously now, or like even growing up, you hear about the British ruling over Ghana during that time, and you kind of really hear it in a negative light. And yeah, of course, like a lot of awful things happened back then, I'm sure. But then she also talks about how even during colonial era, Ghanaians were still living, you know. So it wasn't like, yeah, the British are ruling over Ghana, so that's it. Ghanaians are just there, they're not doing anything, and the British are just, doing what they're doing, and that's it. Like, of course, what they were doing was not needed, I'm sure, but Ghanaians were still getting on with their lives. You know, Ghanaians were going to school, Ghanaians were working, Ghanaians were building Ghana with what they had at the time, with what they had access to. For example, she talked about how her great grandfather, like became very successful in his cocoa business, and you know, he became so successful that he built a business that was competing with a really big British company at the time in Ghana. So Ghanaians were trying their best to live under the colonial rule at the time, and you don't really hear the narrative that much. Well, I don't really hear the narrative that much. Most of the time, you hear when you hear the narrative of colonialism, it's often about what the colonial masters did, and that's it. You don't hear what the people who were being ruled over, i.e. Ghanaians at the time, were doing. And Mrs. Ajman-Rollins really tells you that story. You know, during that time, Ghanaians were trying their best to live. They were trying their best to get on with their lives with the freedom that they had. And at the same time too, she tells you about the atrocities that were going on in that time. And it's interesting for it to come from someone who's kind of like still alive now. You know, like she's telling you like, oh, this is what happened, and she witnessed some of these things. You know, she had family members who kind of like bad things happened to them because of colonialism. You know, bad things happened to them because the British were ruling over the country. And it's just interesting. Like, I love history, and I feel like she tells history, like she really narrated the history of Ghana during like when she was growing up in a really beautiful way, and like you get it from both sides. And for me, that really helped me to kind of understand how life was back then a bit more. I mean, obviously it's not only her account of history that counts, but I enjoyed the way that she talked about colonialism back then as well. Another part of this book that I loved is how she talked about her marriage. And I think maybe a lot of Ghanaians may agree with me on this, but when like growing up and even now, there are a lot of like stereotypical things that are said about her and her late husband, and most of the time I kind of feel like she was always in the shadow of her husband. But then I feel like this lady has done so much, and the relationship between her and her husband is just so beautiful. Like the way she narrates how they met, you know, how she, you know, it got to a point where she was really like worried for her husband as he was becoming prominent in the politics of Ghana, and even the motive behind why the man wanted to kind of go into politics. I think ever since I started getting interested in politics, or ever since I was in Ghana growing up, I didn't really hear kind of like the positive things about why late former President Jerry John Rawlings did what he did back then, you know. So I don't really want to say so much, but you should read the book and you should really kind of get to know why certain things happen. So I know that there was a coup. So like there was a coup d'etat, and her husband was like heavily involved. And then there's a prominent date in Ghanaian history, June 4th. So like I know a lot of Ghanaians know this, but like June 4th, which is like a big, and I didn't really know much about June 4th, but the book talks about June 4th, and I'm just like, wow, this is history, you know. And it's beautiful to hear it from her point of view, because even as she's telling it, she's kind of like when you read the book, you realize that she's telling the history or the story of June 4th, or even the coup that happened, from like the periphery, because she wasn't really like allowed in at the time. So it was kind of like a coup, but like for the men, it was like politics, but for men at the time. Women were not really as political at the time. So she's telling the story, but she's telling it from the kind of like from the outside of what was happening, from what she was seeing, and from how it was affecting her, because her husband was directly involved in what was happening. So it's interesting how she tells that story, and she builds on that by talking about how that affects their marriage, and how the same thing also kind of like helps their marriage to evolve to a certain level. So as I was reading it, I'm just like, wow, this is a woman who's really kind of like had to build herself up, you know, for what was ahead. And so like as I'm reading the book, like chapter after chapter, the title of the book start to make more sense. Like, yeah, it really takes a woman, you know, to kind of like stand and go through what she has kind of like had to deal with. For those of you that know, like, politics in Ghana, politics in Africa in general is just brutal. So for her to stand and still be going through it now, I feel like it really does take a woman. Like, it takes a woman to really do the things and achieve the things that she has achieved. And for me, I really enjoyed reading the book, and it has really kind of like shattered a lot of assumptions and that I had in my head about her and her late husband. And I'm really happy about that, because like growing up, or even now, like I remember when her late husband died. He died last year in 2020. Like, a lot of things were said, and I'm sure things have happened. I'm sure he done things, or I'm sure his during his regime things happened, no doubt about that. But I think reading the book really brought my mind back to the humanity of herself and her husband. Because sometimes as human beings, when someone does something bad, straight away we kind of like forget that person is a human being. And for me, reading the book really helped me to just remember that, to realize that this lady is a human being, her husband is also a human being, and human beings do bad things sometimes. Human beings do things that are shocking sometimes. So I'm glad that by reading the book I was kind of reminded that that means they are human beings in tree, and I really appreciate that aspect about the book. And then another point that I really like about this book is, as she's telling you the story about her life, about kind of like her husband, about her education. She kind of talks a lot about her education as well, about her parents. So she had a really good relationship with her parents growing up, and that story as well is really beautiful to see. Like, she was really close with her dad and her mom, and it was just nice to kind of see. And like, as the book goes on, as you read from chapter to chapter, even the good relationship that she had with her parents helps her to kind of like stand the things that were going to happen later on in her life. So that's a really important aspect. But another point that I love is how she talks about Ghana, in general. As she's growing up, obviously Ghana is changing, and she notices those changes, and she talks about those changes as she's growing up. So for example, she talks about how when she started university, the things that were happening around her. She's a young lady, she's at university now, and like, as I was reading the book, I'm like, Ghana back then was interesting, because now I don't know how university life is like in Ghana. I've never been to university in Ghana, but of course it's different. And I feel like I have friends that go to university in Ghana, and when we talk, the kind of narrative that they give me about university life in Ghana, it was definitely different compared to when she was at uni. I feel like during her time at uni, there was that feeling of collective action more in the country. So the young people in the country wanting to be really active in how the country was being run. And for me, that's really interesting, because now I don't know if that's the same in Ghana, because I don't live in Ghana, so I don't know how heavily involved young people in Ghana are in politics, or like how young people are heavily involved in wanting to have a say in how the country is run. But it's interesting how, like, actively during her time, young people would actively get involved and kind of like, say to the politicians, like, what's going on, like, we don't like how the country is being run, and therefore things need to change. Like, to the point where some of the young people would get hurt, like, during protests, so it's really interesting. But then one thing as well that it made me realize is that it seems like always when things are not going right in a nation, like, the young people will rise up some way, somehow, to kind of be like, no, we don't like this. Eventually we are the ones that this is going to affect, and therefore we want change. Like, I don't know if you guys remember, I mean, how can you forget, but recently in Nigeria, the whole NSAS situation, like, the young people in the nation rose up and they were like, we don't like what's going on. And that happens in the book as well. Like, Nana Ajma Rollins talks about that happening when she was at uni, the young people coming together and protesting against the political ruling at the time in Ghana, and how the young people did not really like it, and they protested against that. So, and not just that, she talks about Ghana, like, she even mentions Makola in Ghana, like, at the time, how Makola was during her time. That Makola is a really big market in Accra. And she talks about that. She talks about Kumasi during that time. Like, the book is just packed with Ghanaian history, and it's really interesting. I would recommend you to read this book. She even talks about the relationship, the weird and awkward relationship she had with her mother-in-law, and it's just beautiful. The writing is immaculate. Like, it's a memoir. like I've already said, but it's like it's just written in a way that it's like you're just reading a story. It doesn't even feel like you're reading a memoir, because one thing about memoirs and autobiographies is that they can be quite factual, but this book has that factual aspect, but then at the same time it has that story feel. So like every chapter I'm reading, I feel like I'm not even reading someone's life. I'm just reading like a storybook, and I like that aspect about it. It made me like, it got me really glued to the book, and it got me really interested in every story and every chapter. And then lastly, you know, as I was reading the book, I learned new things. You know, I learned new things about Ghana. So like the different presidents that had, the different presidents and prime ministers that have come and gone in Ghana, and like there are quite a few of them that I didn't know of, and there are quite a few that I had heard of their names, but I didn't really know how their presidential ruling was back then. And it's just interesting to know some of these things. So if you're interested in history, if you're interested in African history, specifically Ghanaian history, this book will really serve you well. Yes. And lastly, I think the book will just help you to kind of just love this woman. Like I've really, I don't know, reading the book, I've just come to love her, and I really pray and hope that she is doing well. I don't know her, but I love the book, and now I love her. So yeah, It Takes a Woman is a good book, and I would kind of encourage every woman to really read this book, because I feel like this book is some kind of, I don't know if I want to say it's similar, but if you've read Michelle Obama Becoming, maybe, you know, like the way kind of she talked about her life. I'm not going to do Ajumai Rollins talks about her life kind of that way, but more in depth and more as well externally. So like talking about external factors around her and how that has shaped her life. And one last thing, I said one last thing before, but one last thing. Her name, Konedu, I didn't even know the meaning of that, of the name. And the name Konedu is Konedu, which means fight till the end in Chi. So there's just interesting stuff in this book that you need to learn. Especially if you're a Ghanaian woman, get the book and read it and learn more about our beautiful, rich history. And yeah, it takes a woman to raise a woman, you know. And there's a proverb that I used to hear back in Ghana a lot, and she talks about that proverb in the book and even how that proverb came about. So the proverb says that when you give birth to a man, you've given birth to one person, or when you give birth to a woman or a girl, you've given birth to a whole nation. And you know, she explains a bit about the proverb and how it came about. So yeah, I'm gonna stop talking now, and you should get a copy of It Takes a Woman. I got this copy as a gift from a friend of mine, but I know he bought it from Amazon for me. So you can get one from Amazon. I will find the link and link it below. But yeah, It Takes a Woman. It has a beautiful cover as well. And this is Ajumai Rollins on the cover, looking beautiful. Like, this is like her signature look, by the way. I mean, ever since I've been seeing this woman on TV, she's always wearing duku, like the head scarf like that, with her kaba and slit, with a belt in the middle of her kaba and slit, you know. So she's really known for this look. So yeah, get a copy and read it and let me know what you think. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.